This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode in our podcast series on being ESG Wise. My name is Meg Lee and I'm the co-lead of Hall & Wilcox's Environment, Social and Governance Industry Group. Let me start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm recording today. I recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people listening to this podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Clint Wilson, who is General Manager Sustainability at Centuria Capital Group, a specialist real estate investment manager with approximately 20 billion in funds under management across funds and investment bonds. Centuria also manage unlisted funds and has over 12,000 investors in those funds. Centuria operates in a wide variety of sectors, including office, industrial, large format retail, healthcare, and a recent expansion into agriculture. Before joining Centuria, Clint held sustainability roles with Lendlease and John Holland. Welcome, Clint.
Thank you for having me, Meg.
It's a pleasure. Well, perhaps, Clint, you could start by telling us a bit about yourself and your role at Centuria and the importance of sustainability.
Absolutely. And may I begin by also paying my respects to the traditional custodians on the land in which I'm joining you today, and that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I think as we start to talk about ESG and sustainability, we're quite fortunate to live amongst the oldest living culture in the world. So as paying my respects, I think there's a lot of inspiration we can draw from the traditional custodians and where we're living and where we come from as we start to talk about this. So going back a little bit about me, I joined Centuria about a year and a half ago. Previously used to work in Lendlease's global sustainability team. At Centuria, I help the business integrate sustainability into their day-to-day operations, working with the teams to help them unlock ESG value and what that brings to the wider. At Centuria, I'd argue that sustainability is very important. So I'm fortunate enough to report to the CEO and report to our culture and ESG board committee, which our chairman sits on. So at the moment, it's a very large focus for the group.
That's fantastic. I've had a look at your latest sustainability report and I understand you've got what you call an active management approach, including funds management, transactions, commercial property services and development. Can you explain a bit about how ESG factors into that active management approach?
Oof, straight in the hot seat. No, I love it. Look, I think to start, we need to know what is ESG and how it relates to Centuria. It's important to note ESG, it's a very broad set of issues on how a company makes a very broad set of issues on what a company chooses to focus on with their business approach and their investment philosophy. So one thing that we did first is what is ESG Centuria? What are the material ESG topics that we choose to focus on? Now, when determining what those material topics are, we need to be cognizant of who Centuria is. So we manage funds, both listed and unlisted, property within diverse asset classes, agriculture, retail, commercial. We also operate in New Zealand and Australia. So we need to take all of that into context when we think about ESG. One of the first things we did when identifying the ESG topics is we went to the frameworks. We went to frameworks like SASB, GRI, DJSI, MSCI, just to name a few, and looked what are the material topics that they would expect a company like us to be looking at. The second thing we did when identifying what are the material topics for us is we rationalize that for our stakeholders. So who are our stakeholders? So our employees, our investors, our tenants, our customers, just to make sure that when we're looking through these frameworks to identify these ESG topics, that they're relevant to those stakeholders. They're actually adding value or they're mitigating risk. And finally, just as a litmus test, we went through and looked at our industry peers. What are some of the other the real estate companies doing to make sure that, we're kind of sitting within the right spot. We're not going too far. We're not obviously missing anything that's really important. So once we've actually gone through that, we're able to really distill the university ESG topics down to a handful of topics that we deem to be material for the group. And so those material topics are ones that either add value to the group or mitigate the biggest risk. Once we've distilled that into an ESG framework, or our sustainability framework, as we like to call it, we then work about integrating that into our day-to-day operations, building that into the BAU processes that we have in place. I'm a really big believer that you can have a perfect framework and you can have all the right topics and do all the right things, but unless you've got the culture that comes along with it, it's going to fail. And so part of our approach is making sure that we've got the right culture that supports the processes and the framework that we've got in place. So when people go about their day-to-day operations in making those investment decisions, managing those assets, that they understand the value that the ESG topics that we're focused on is being delivered.
Wow.
Sorry, there's a lot there.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there. And it is such a big task. And it sounds like you've taken a really, systematic approach to identifying your material issues, which is fantastic. And I think, as you said, ESG is such a broad framework and covers so many issues. So you mentioned working with your stakeholders and employees and investors. And how have you sort of gone about that process?
Oh, okay, great question. So the first thing we did with working with our stakeholders is kind of identifying who those stakeholders are. So we talked about some of them already. So our investors, we do a lot of our investor meetings one-on-one. We go actively engage with our investors to understand what are their material topics. Obviously, we're listening to our investors, what they're saying out in the market, to make sure that we're rationalizing there. Our employees, fantastic resource that we've drawn from within the business. They've got a wealth of experience in this industry, so we'd be remiss not to include them. We actually did a whole series of workshops with our employees to talk to what are they hearing from their own internal stakeholders, the tenants that they're working with, the customers they're working with, so making sure that brings it all into the front. We also do a lot of stakeholder engagement with industry bodies. So there's amazing, again, a wealth of knowledge within Australia. So the Green Building Council of Australia, Property Council of Australia, the Neighbours, for example, are some fantastic industry bodies that we've brought their experience and their advice in when we're looking at the ESG topics. And then we've distilled that into, as I mentioned before, our sustainability framework.
Fantastic. You mentioned the governance committee that you've got and how that works with senior management. I'm just interested to know a bit more about that model and how that works in terms of integrating your functional teams with that sort of policy decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Centuria, we have a culture and ESG board committee, which was formed last year. And on that, we have our chair, Centuria Capital Group chair. And we also, that's chaired by the wonderful Susan Wilden, who brings a wealth of knowledge and a lot of energy to this function. We also have our joint CEO, Jason Hulich, who also sits on that committee. And so that board committee really provides a lot of oversight on ESG for the group. Now, underneath that, we have what we call an ESG management committee, which we have representatives from across the business, from different parts that sit on that, as well as our joint CEO, John McBain, and myself. And those two committees work together to distill our ESG framework into actionable items that we can then roll out across the business. Personally, it works fantastic. And the reason being is there's a lot of transparency that you get from management reporting up into that board. And so the board has really good oversight in what's actually happening in the day-to-day operations. But because we've also got the board that's the ESG management committee that's reporting directly to that board committee, that board committee really pushes management to go further and beyond. So it's never a case of, pack up shop, we're done. It's always like, what do you do next? What is the next thing? And I think that's something that's really important with ESG is the work is never done. There's always the next thing that's going to come. And I'm a big believer that ESG eventually becomes BAU business. It gets built into people's day-to-day jobs. And then the sustainability people are always looking at the next thing that they can bring back into the business and integrate that into the BAU processes and systems.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love this. There's a quote from a conference I went to last year that someone said, it's no longer a woke agenda. It's not the boardrooms haven't been taken over by the lefties. It is BAU.
I completely agree. And personally for me, sustainability ESG is all about adding value to the business. And I think sustainability, it's there to create profit, to mitigate risk It's not like a woke sort of agenda. It adds value to the business. So, and I think that's you get these really amazing light bulb moments with the business when they go, I get it, I understand. And that's really that awareness piece, which I go back to for making sure that sustainability falls over if the culture in the business doesn't understand it and doesn't embrace it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations too on publishing your first sustainability report in your what must have been your second year with the company. I'm interested to understand what drivers there were for doing so, given it's largely a voluntary process in Australia. And I guess, can you share some experiences on how you went about preparing that first report?
Yeah, I have to be honest. The first report, it was a bit of a challenge. I actually did it within my first 3 months of joining the company.
Oh, within 3 months. Wow. Well done.
No. And so I'm really proud at how the business and the group came together to deliver their first sustainability report. The real driver behind a sustainability report is about making sure that we can tell that narrative to the market about what we're doing with regards to ESG, because there is a lot of vested interest coming from a wide range of stakeholders about the company's non-financial performance and their undertakings. It's a great way for us to say to investors, this is what we're doing regarding climate change. We know it's a big issue. Here is our approach. Here's what we're doing. It's a fantastic way that we can say to potential talent that we're trying to attract from the market, this is what we do for our employees. This is our culture. So those drivers alone really led us to releasing our first sustainability report. And I'm really excited that we're planning to release our second sustainability report in the coming weeks.
Oh, fantastic. And in going about preparing the report, can you give us some examples of, I guess, challenges along the way, gathering data from your different groups? I know that's one of the biggest challenges people have, and I guess also, setting targets for going forward and net zero targets is obviously a big one at the moment. Are you sort of looking at that for your next report, and how's that going?
Yeah, great questions. So some of the challenges we had with our first sustainability report was people understanding why we're doing it, why are we going to report this stuff? We haven't done it before. And again, it comes back to that value proposition that sustainability ESG has for the business. So that was a huge challenge, having the conversations internally with the business about trying to collect information that they've never had to collect before. So there was that bridge that had to be built, going, okay, I now understand why we need to do this. I understand the value. The next thing is, because a lot of the time we hadn't done a sustainability report before, it was quite difficult to find some of the data. So the systems and processes were being developed and built. And so we've done a lot of work internally, and we've got a really robust system in place now to start collecting and reporting against this information. Again, one of the challenges with our sustainability report was there's so many sustainability frameworks out there. Choosing the right one to report against can be quite difficult. I always like to refer to it as the ESG ABC soup. So whether it's GRI,
there's so many acronyms.
Whether it's GRI, TCFD, or SASB, we don't know which one to report against, and we had to take a pause to really go, right, which one's going to add the most value. TCFD is a fantastic example of this. Its rise to prominence as the go-to disclosure for climate change has meant organisations probably don't see as much value in disclosing against CDP anymore. So that was something we had to take a pause and work that out. With regards to looking at target setting and all of that, we are currently going through the process of internally reviewing our systems and our processes and our appetite against our sustainability framework, which came with our first sustainability report. And with that, we'll be able to then come to the market with a more authentic approach with those measures and monitoring that you'd expect to see from targets and metrics. So we're definitely looking at it at the moment.
Yeah, look, I guess we're finding that the pressure to set net zero targets is sort of being counterbalanced by the risk of greenwashing and doing it the right way and making sure, as you say, it's authentic. So has the greenwashing fear sort of factored into how you're going about being cautious yet ambitious? It's a balance, I guess.
It is a balance, and we've definitely got a watch and brief on it at the moment. So we're we're doing a fantastic work at the moment in the space of progressing our operations towards a low carbon economy, looking at renewables. We've got a PPA in place so we can start to look at how we can transition to a low carbon economy. So we've got the right mechanisms in place to start doing that, but we're being really cognizant that we want to make sure that anything we do is considered and takes into consideration, is considered and really is respectful to all of our stakeholders and value chain that we have. And what I mean by that is anything that we set, we want to make sure that it adds value for everyone and that it's commercially viable and that it stacks up. I think greenwashing, the regulators have spotted this and they're playing catch up real fast. And one of the things that I've noticed in the market off the back of COP26 is the ISSB standards are probably going to be coming through quite quickly. And so that's something that we'll start to think about as well as we move forward. As the regulators get involved with this, they start to set consistent disclosures. I think that will start to kind of reveal a lot more about who's not actually living up to their commitments and who is. So again, really big watching brief for us at Centuria.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the guidance they've released has been pretty helpful, pretty logical advice. Make sure that any targets you set are backed up by science and based on the frameworks. I think is really sound advice. And as you say, when the ISSB standards come out, I think that will really help moving forward with sort of standardising the way that people are reporting. Clint, I'm really interested in the expansion of Centuria into the agriculture sector. It's quite different to the built environment in which you're used to operating. And I wonder whether the thinking behind that is to start to look at carbon farming and generating ACCUs.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Our expansion into the agriculture asset is, for me personally, extremely exciting. You rightly mentioned there's a large amount of opportunity to start looking at nature-based solutions in response to carbon offsets and net zero commitments that might be made at some point. I think it's a really interesting value proposition that Centuria can bring to the table. Being able to have an agricultural asset class diversifies us diversifies us away from our peers, but gives us that opportunity to have increased transparency and audit and traceability if we did go and look at something like GenAI and ACCUs and offsets. At the moment, our agricultural assets are really focused on acquiring assets that have really high ESG credentials. And so we just launched our Centuria Agricultural Fund this year, and one of our seed assets, and that was the Flavorite Glasshouse down in Victoria. Fantastic asset. We're looking at assets that have use 90% less water than traditional farming techniques out in the paddock. They recycle almost all of their waste and have opportunities to divert food waste back into the local community. So we're really focused on stuff like that. And that's going back to that ESG management approach there. It's examples like that show our sustainability approach really coming to life.
That's fantastic. How exciting. Lots to look forward to.
Yeah, there is a lot to look forward to, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, Clint, for joining me today and sharing your experiences.
I really appreciate the opportunity to connect and talk with you today, Meg. So
excellent. It certainly sounds like it's been a whirlwind since you started at Centuria, and sounds like you've made some great progress along the way. And thank you to all our listeners. We trust that the information and discussion today has been useful. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. You can find our details on our website, hallandwilcox.com.au, or you can connect with us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, and follow our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can subscribe to our podcast on our website. Thanks again for joining us.